The hospital doors burst open and chaos followed. Doctors froze in disbelief as a wounded German Shepherd puppy limped inside, dragging a heavy black bag clenched tightly in his jaws. His fur was matted with blood, his tiny body trembling from exhaustion. The entire hospital seemed to stop. Nurses gasped, patients whispered, and doctors exchanged fearful looks. What could a dying puppy possibly be carrying? Was it dangerous? A warning, or something beyond imagination? His eyes, filled with pain yet burning with determination, begged them to understand. And when the bag was finally opened, the truth that spilled out didn't just shock the hospital, it shook every single soul who witnessed it. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The automatic glass doors of St. Mary's Hospital slid open with a loud hiss, but what entered left everyone frozen in disbelief. A German Shepherd puppy, battered and bleeding, stumbled across the polished tiles. His tiny paws left faint red prints with each step, his body trembling from exhaustion. But what truly stunned everyone was the sight of a large black plastic bag clenched tightly in his jaws. The bag dragged noisily against the floor, heavy and bulky, as if holding something far beyond a dog's strength. At the reception desk, a nurse gasped and clutched her mouth, her clipboard slipping from her fingers. Patients waiting on benches turned their heads in shock, some standing instinctively, unsure if they should move closer or step back. The sterile, calm environment of the hospital shattered in seconds, replaced by whispers, gasps, and hurried footsteps echoing through the wide hallway. The pup's amber eyes, though clouded with pain, burned with urgency, as though begging for someone, anyone, to understand the importance of what he carried. Doctors rushed forward, their white coats swaying as they ran, but their movements slowed when they noticed the blood in the bag. "Is that a bomb?" One patient whispered, panic sparking like wildfire. Fear began to spread. Some people backed away, shielding their children. Security guards exchanged worried glances, unsure whether to intervene or wait. Yet through it all, the puppy pressed forward, his breathing ragged, his strength fading, but his determination unwavering. His entire being radiated one clear message: this bag had to reach the hospital. The sound of his nails clicking against the floor echoed unnaturally loud as the puppy made his way to the center of the lobby. He collapsed to his knees for a moment but refused to release the bag. His bandaged fur was soaked in crimson, his sides rising and falling rapidly as he fought for air. He looked up at the stunned nurse standing closest to him, eyes wide and desperate as if pleading, "Help me." "Open it." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The world seemed suspended between terror and compassion. And then slowly the nurse took a cautious step forward, torn between fear of the unknown and the desperate plea of a dying puppy. The nurse crouched low, her hands trembling as she studied the wounded puppy before her. Up close, his injuries were even more horrifying. Deep gashes along his legs, blood matted into his once shiny fur, and hastily wrapped bandages that had already soaked through. Every breath he took rattled like it might be his last, yet his jaws stayed locked around the black bag, refusing to let go. The sight was enough to bring tears to her eyes. This wasn't just a stray in pain. This was a creature on a mission. Another doctor knelt beside her, cautiously reaching out. The puppy growled weakly, his small body shivering as if warning them not to touch the bag. "Easy, boy," the doctor murmured softly, shifting his focus to the pup's injuries instead. He pressed gentle fingers along the dog's ribs and winced. "Broken bones, maybe worse." The pup whimpered but didn't back away. His eyes, glassy yet determined, never strayed from the humans surrounding him. He wanted them to see the bag, but he also wanted them to save him. Behind them, the hospital lobby buzzed with confusion. A child clutched his mother's hand tightly, whispering, "Mommy, why is the puppy bleeding?" An old man shook his head, muttering prayers under his breath. Fear still hung heavy in the air, but slowly, compassion began to outweigh suspicion. The nurse reached for a towel, pressing it gently against the dog's shoulder wound to stop the bleeding. His body trembled under her touch, yet he did not resist. He trusted her even in his pain. Mark, the head of security, stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "We can't ignore this," he said firmly. "We need to see what's inside that bag." But as his words echoed, the puppy let out a faint, heartbreaking whine, his eyes locking onto the nurses once more. For just a moment the crowd fell silent, Everyone could see it now. This wasn't just an injured dog. This was a desperate messenger, fighting against death itself to deliver a secret no one yet understood. All eyes shifted toward the black bag lying on the floor, its surface smeared with dirt and streaks of blood from the puppy's struggle. It looked ordinary enough, just a trash bag tied tightly at the top. Yet the way the puppy refused to release it made it feel anything but ordinary. The nurse hesitated, glancing at the other doctors. "What if it's dangerous?" she whispered. Her voice cracked under the weight of both fear and pity. One of the security guards stepped closer, his hand resting uneasily on his radio. "We need to treat this as a potential threat," he said firmly. "Could be explosives. Or something worse." His words sent ripples of panic through the crowd. Several patients stood and began edging away, whispering nervously as they kept their distance. The once busy lobby now felt like a stage of tension, where every second dragged unbearably long. But the doctors weren't convinced. One of them crouched near the bag, studying it carefully. There was no ticking sound, no strange wires, no visible danger. Still, his gut twisted. He turned to Mark, the head of security. "We can't just leave it. Whatever this pup risked his life to bring here, it matters." Mark's jaw tightened. He glanced at the puppy, who, though weak and trembling, growled faintly as though warning them not to dismiss his burden. The nurse's eyes softened. She couldn't look away from the dog's pleading gaze. "This isn't just an animal carrying random trash," she said, her voice firmer now. "He's trying to tell us something." The puppy let out a low whine as if agreeing, his paw weakly nudging the bag forward. For a moment, the crowd's fear clashed with their curiosity, pulling everyone into a silent standstill. Was this bag a danger or a desperate cry for help? The puppy's chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, his breathing ragged as he clung to the bag with all the strength left in his tiny body. Every muscle trembled, but still he refused to let go. His bloodshot eyes locked onto the nurse's face, glistening with desperation. It wasn't the stare of a frightened animal. It was a plea, silent yet deafening, a cry that demanded to be understood. The nurse's heart ached. She sank to her knees, tears welling as she whispered softly, "What are you trying to tell us, boy?" Around them, the atmosphere thickened with uncertainty. Mark and the other officers held back, their instincts screaming to secure the bag while the doctors leaned closer, torn between fear and compassion. The puppy shifted, letting out a pitiful whimper that echoed through the sterile hallways. His paw lifted weakly, pressing against the black plastic as if to say, "Look here. This is why I came." The sound pierced through the fear clouding the lobby, softening even the hardest faces. The nurse's trembling hand inched forward, not toward the bag, but toward the puppy himself. She brushed his fur gently, and though he flinched from pain, he didn't resist. Instead, his eyes softened, trusting her in that fragile moment. It was as if he knew she was the one who would listen, the one who would act. Behind her, whispers rippled through the crowd. Why won't he let go? What if it's something important? The questions hung heavy, pressing on every heart in the room. Mark exhaled sharply, torn between protocol and the undeniable truth in front of him. "He's trying to show us something," he admitted, his voice low. The puppy let out another faint growl, then rested his muzzle protectively over the bag, eyelids fluttering as exhaustion threatened to consume him. The message was clear. Whatever was inside mattered more than his pain, more than his own life. And in that haunting silence, everyone finally understood. They had to open it. Mark raised a hand, signaling the officers to hold their positions. The tension was thick enough to choke the room, but the urgency in the puppy's fading strength pressed against everyone's conscience. "We need to act," he said firmly, his voice echoing off the white walls. The doctors exchanged anxious glances. One wrong move could endanger lives, but doing nothing might be worse. The black bag lay in the center of the lobby like a ticking clock, its meaning veiled in mystery. Every second stretched into eternity as the puppy whimpered faintly, his body collapsing further against the cold floor. The head doctor, Dr. Lewis, stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "We can't ignore this any longer," he said, slipping on a pair of gloves. "We'll handle this carefully." Two nurses wheeled over a stainless steel tray with surgical scissors and medical shears, tools that might cut through the plastic without disturbing its contents. Security formed a protective circle, instructing patients to keep back. Mothers shielded their children while elderly patients clung to one another, whispering prayers. The hospital lobby no longer felt like a place of healing. It had become a stage of dread, anticipation, and fragile hope. The nurse closest to the pup leaned in, stroking his head gently as she whispered reassurance. "Stay with us, boy. We're listening now." His eyes fluttered open for a moment, glassy but resolute, as though giving them permission. She nodded to Dr. Lewis, who bent toward the bag, his hands steady despite the tremor in his jaw. He pressed the scissors against the knot at the top. The plastic stretched under the tension, crinkling loudly in the heavy silence. A collective gasp filled the room as the first tiny cut sliced through. No one dared breathe. Suddenly the bag shifted. A faint sound, muffled, fragile, rose from within. The doctor froze, scissors hovering in midair. Patients craned their necks, their fear replaced by raw confusion. The puppy stirred weakly, nudging the bag with his nose, urging them onward. The sound came again, unmistakable this time. A soft whimper, not from the dog, but from inside the bag itself. The nurse's face drained of color, her hand covering her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "There's something alive in there." The silence in the lobby shattered with that faint, muffled cry. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't dangerous, it was alive. Dr. Lewis froze mid-cut, staring at the black plastic as if it had just come to life. That sounded like... His words trailed off, but the nurse beside him finished the thought, her voice trembling. "A baby." The word rippled through the crowd, sparking gasps and shocked whispers. Mothers instinctively clutched their children closer, while the officers stiffened, unsure if this was relief or the beginning of an even darker mystery. The puppy, lying weak and bloodied, lifted his head just enough to nudge the bag again, his eyes locking with the nurse's. His whimper was soft, but the meaning was undeniable. "Open it. Save what's inside." Tears pricked her eyes as she nodded, her hands shaking as she gestured for Dr. Lewis to continue. The doctor leaned forward once more, slicing carefully along the top of the bag. Each snip of the scissors echoed like thunder, the crowd leaning in as though the truth itself was about to burst free. The plastic peeled back slowly, revealing a thin layer of damp cloth within. A faint, unmistakable wail pierced the air, louder this time, fragile but desperate. The nurse gasped, pressing her hand to her heart. "It is a baby," she cried. But the sight grew stranger still. The tiny form was wrapped tightly in blankets hidden deep within the folds of the bag, as if someone had meant for it never to be found. Shock and horror washed across the faces in the room. Who would do this? And how had this bleeding puppy dragged such a burden all the way here? Dr. Lewis carefully pulled the cloth aside, revealing a newborn, its skin pale and its cries growing weaker. The entire lobby fell into stunned silence before erupting into frantic urgency. "We need an incubator now," the doctor barked. Nurses rushed into motion, wheeling equipment toward the scene. The puppy gave one final whine, his eyes fluttering shut as though his mission was finally complete. And while chaos returned to the hospital floor, everyone understood the truth. This dog hadn't carried danger into their midst. He had carried life. For a brief moment, relief washed through the crowd, then just as quickly, unease returned. Whispers erupted like wildfire, carrying panic from one end of the lobby to the other. Who would abandon a baby like that? Someone muttered. What if there's more? Another voice snapped, fear rising again. The newborn's fragile cries echoed through the sterile hall, haunting every listener. Some faces softened with pity, but others hardened with suspicion. If a puppy had dragged this child here, bloodied and broken, what horror had been left behind in the shadows? Mark, the head of security, scanned the room sharply, his instincts on high alert. "We can't assume this is over," he said, his tone firm. "If there's a baby here wrapped and hidden, then someone put it there. And whoever did that might still be nearby." The thought sent a ripple of fear through the patients, many of whom began backing away from the scene as if danger could still spill from the bag. Parents shielded their children, elderly patients shook their heads in disbelief, and hospital staff struggled to keep order. Dr. Lewis held the newborn close, checking its shallow breaths and trembling body. His hands shook not only from fear of losing the baby, but from the realization of what this meant. "This child was meant to die," he whispered. The weight of those words settled over the room like a shroud. People exchanged horrified looks, some with tears in their eyes, others with anger boiling just beneath the surface. The puppy, still lying unconscious on the floor, became the unspoken hero of the moment. a battered soldier who had carried the truth into the light. But the unease wouldn't fade. What if the bag held more than just the baby? One officer asked darkly. What if this was a distraction? His words made the room tighten with paranoia again. Mark hesitated, torn between focusing on the fragile infant and the lingering possibility of a hidden threat. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, as suspicion and fear clashed with compassion and awe. And in that storm of emotions, one thing was clear. The story was far from over. As the chaos swirled around the newborn, a sudden sound cut through the noise. A weak, choking whimper. Heads turned just in time to see the German Shepherd puppy stumble forward, his legs trembling under his own weight. His jaws finally released the torn plastic, and his body collapsed heavily onto the cold, tiled floor. A gasp swept across the crowd. The dog that had saved a life was now slipping closer to death. The nurse rushed to his side, pressing her hands against his small frame. His heartbeat was rapid but faint, his breaths shallow and broken. Blood pooled beneath him, staining her white shoes as she whispered, No, don't you dare give up now." Her tears splashed onto his fur as she tried to keep him awake, stroking his head gently. The puppy's eyes fluttered open for only a moment, cloudy yet determined, as though he was making sure the baby was safe before he allowed himself to rest. "Get a gurney. Now," Dr. Lewis shouted, balancing the infant in one arm while pointing toward the pup with the other. Two orderlies scrambled to bring equipment, but hesitation hung heavy in the air. He was just a dog, some thought silently, but their guilt burned at the realization he had done more than any of them. Security shifted uncomfortably, their stern expressions cracking as they watched the scene unfold. Patients whispered in awe, torn between the baby's survival and the puppy's sacrifice. Mark knelt beside the nurse, his usually firm voice softening. "You fought this hard, buddy. Don't stop now." The German shepherd's tail twitched faintly, the last sign of his spirit refusing to surrender. Around them, the newborn wailed weakly, as if connected to the pup's struggle, their cries blending into one heartbreaking symphony. The hospital, once a place of order and control, now felt like the battlefield of two fragile lives, one just beginning, the other hanging by a thread. And for everyone watching, the truth became undeniable. This wasn't just an injured stray. This was a hero, and heroes could not be allowed to die. The newborn was rushed toward the pediatric ward wrapped in warm blankets, while the unconscious puppy lay surrounded by frantic nurses. But the black bag, torn only halfway open, still lay in the center of the lobby, its contents unexplored. The room's tension hadn't faded. If anything, it had thickened. Whispers filled the air, fear and curiosity colliding like storm clouds. Everyone knew the baby was only part of the mystery. Something else was hidden inside. Mark's jaw tightened as he gave a curt nod. "We need to finish this." Security formed a tighter perimeter, clearing the remaining patients from the lobby. Dr. Lewis, his gloves stained with blood, returned to the bag with grim determination. He slid the scissors deeper into the plastic, peeling back layer after layer. The crinkling sound was deafening in the silence, each cut stretching nerves tighter. The nurse beside him held her breath, her eyes locked on the dark folds, bracing for whatever truth lay within. As the last fold was pulled back, a strange smell escaped. Metallic, sour, unnatural. Dr. Lewis winced, reaching in with steady hands. The crowd craned their necks, hearts pounding, waiting for the secret to reveal itself. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he lifted out the second bundle. Wrapped in tattered cloth and bound with rope, it looked heavier, more ominous than the baby's fragile swaddle. A collective gasp rippled across the room. Someone muttered, "Dear God." But no one dared step closer. The doctor laid the bundle onto a stainless steel tray, carefully loosening the rope. As the cloth fell away, shock washed over the room once more. Inside wasn't another child, nor an object of violence, but something equally haunting. Medical documents, vials of blood, and a tiny bracelet with a name written in fading ink. The nurse's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. This is evidence," she whispered. The puppy hadn't only carried life into the hospital, he had dragged with him a secret that could expose a terrible truth. And in that moment, every person understood. This story was far from over. The tray gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights as Dr. Lewis pulled the cloth completely aside. Gasps filled the room louder than before. The bundle wasn't just papers and vials, it was a chilling collection of truth. Alongside the newborn's bracelet lay photographs, medical reports, and handwritten notes, all pointing to one horrifying conclusion. The documents detailed illegal experiments with names of patients, infants, listed in cold clinical handwriting. The hospital staff stared in disbelief. This wasn't trash. It was evidence of a crime so monstrous it left them breathless. The nurse's trembling hands flipped through one of the reports, her eyes darting over the words. "These aren't ordinary records," she whispered, her voice cracking. They're from here. Our hospital." Her knees weakened as the weight of betrayal sank in. Doctors exchanged horrified glances, their stomachs twisting with dread. Somewhere within these walls, someone had tried to bury the truth and had nearly buried an innocent child to hide it. The puppy hadn't dragged danger to their doorstep. He had dragged justice. Mark's face darkened, his fists clenching at his sides. "Someone wanted this gone," he muttered. "Someone powerful." His eyes swept the lobby, scanning every staff member as if the culprit might be standing among them, watching their own secret unravel. Panic rippled through the crowd. If this evidence tied back to the hospital, then the enemy wasn't outside, it was within. For the first time, the fear that gripped the room wasn't just about what was in the bag, but about who had put it there. The unconscious puppy stirred faintly on the floor, a soft whimper breaking the silence. All eyes turned toward him. This broken creature had carried not just a life, but the truth no one else had dared expose. The nurse brushed his fur gently, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He knew," she whispered. "He brought us the proof." The baby's cries echoed faintly from down the hall, blending with the gasps of disbelief. And in that haunting moment, the hospital realized they weren't just treating a rescue case. They were standing at the center of a scandal that would shake their world to its core. Dr. Lewis's hands trembled as he sifted through the blood-stained papers, his eyes scanning the cruel details written in black ink. Each line confirmed what his heart already feared. The hospital, his hospital, had been complicit in something unspeakable. His throat tightened. He looked around at his colleagues, faces pale, eyes wide with disbelief. "This isn't a mistake," he said softly, almost to himself. "This was intentional." The words seemed to suck the air from the room, leaving only silence and horror. The nurse stepped closer, her voice breaking. "But why? Who could do this?" Her question hung unanswered in the sterile air. Dr. Lewis closed his eyes, flashes of memory searing through his mind. Restricted files, unexplained orders, patients who had vanished without explanation. It all connected now. The abandoned baby, the damning evidence, the desperate puppy. It wasn't coincidence. It was a cover-up unraveling in front of them. His heart sank. Somewhere within these very walls lurked someone willing to sacrifice the most innocent lives. Mark's voice cut through the silence, low and grim. "This dog didn't stumble here by accident. He brought us this because someone wanted the truth exposed." He glanced at the unconscious pup, his admiration evident. If we hadn't opened that bag, the child would have died, and the evidence would have disappeared forever. The puppy's weak chest rose and fell, as if silently agreeing. The room's tension shifted, fear giving way to a dawning realization. They were holding the key to justice in their hands. Dr. Lewis pressed a trembling hand to his forehead, struggling to steady himself. "We have to act fast," he whispered. "This isn't just about saving the baby anymore, it's about saving every child whose name is in these files." His eyes hardened, resolve replacing fear. For the first time, he understood why the dog had endured so much pain to bring the bag here. It wasn't only survival, it was a plea for truth, for lives beyond their sight. And now, it was their responsibility to finish what he had started. The newborn's faint cries echoed from the pediatric wing, a fragile reminder of how close they had come to tragedy. Dr. Lewis clutched the files tighter, his knuckles white. Every instinct told him the evidence had to be protected, but the danger of exposure meant their time was limited. "If this was hidden in a bag meant to be thrown away," he said, his voice trembling but urgent, "then someone will notice it's missing. They'll come looking for it." The words sent a shiver through the gathered staff. What if the perpetrator was already within the hospital walls, watching their every move? Mark's jaw tightened as he barked orders to his officers. "Lock down the exits. No one leaves without clearance." His voice was sharp, commanding, but beneath it lay the weight of realization. Whoever orchestrated this had power, and they wouldn't give up their secret easily. The lobby shifted into controlled chaos as guards moved into position. Patients were ushered into waiting rooms and doctors huddled over the documents. The clock seemed to tick louder with every passing second, amplifying the urgency in everyone's chest. Meanwhile, the nurse knelt beside the unconscious puppy, her trembling hand pressed against his chest. His breathing was shallow, uneven, his tiny body fighting for each breath. "He doesn't have long," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He gave everything to get here. We can't let him die." Her words struck deeper than she realized. The puppy wasn't just a messenger. He was the only reason they had a chance to uncover the truth at all. Saving him felt as urgent as protecting the child and the evidence. Dr. Lewis stood straighter, his resolve hardening. "We split our efforts," he declared. "One team saves the baby, another guards the evidence, and we get this dog into surgery immediately." His voice carried across the lobby like a battle cry. Nurses, doctors, and security officers sprang into motion, each step fueled by desperation. The hospital had transformed into a fortress of urgency. Every second mattered, every choice a fight against the unseen enemy lurking in the shadows. And in that moment, everyone knew. The race for justice had already begun. The sterile lights of the emergency ward flickered overhead as the puppy was wheeled onto a stretcher. His body was limp, his fur stained with blood, yet even in his unconscious state, his jaws twitched as though still guarding the memory of the black bag. Nurses hurried beside him, their hands pressing against his wounds, trying to stem the bleeding. "Stay with us, boy," one whispered, her voice trembling. But in their hearts, many feared he was already slipping away. As the gurney rolled down the hall, the pup stirred faintly, his eyelids fluttering. A soft whimper escaped his throat, weak but persistent, echoing like a call through the corridor. The nurse at his side gasped, leaning closer. His eyes opened just enough to catch hers, cloudy but filled with unyielding determination. It wasn't the look of an animal surrendering. It was the look of one still fighting, still carrying a mission bigger than himself. His paw twitched against the stretcher, as though reaching for the bag he had carried so far. In the waiting lobby, Mark gripped the edge of the evidence tray, his mind spinning. The files, the baby, the blood, it was all too much. But when he heard the faint echo of the puppy's whine from down the hall, his chest tightened. He rushed forward, appearing at the doorway just as the pup turned his head weakly toward him. "You did it, buddy," Mark whispered, his voice raw. "You don't have to fight anymore." But the dog's eyes told another story. He wasn't done yet. Not until everyone was safe. The monitors beside the gurney beeped erratically, the lines jagged with instability. Doctors rushed in, barking urgent commands. "Prepare for surgery now." The puppy's body trembled violently, as if torn between collapse and sheer willpower. Then, with one final surge of strength, he lifted his head slightly, letting out a weak but determined growl. It was as if he were reminding them all, "Don't stop, don't give up." And in that fragile, defiant moment, every soul in the hospital understood. They were witnessing the courage of a true hero, fighting until his very last breath. The operating room door burst open, and the medical team wheeled the tiny German Shepherd out, his body wrapped in bandages, IV lines trailing alongside him. His chest rose and fell weakly but steadily, proof that against all odds he had survived the surgery. Nurses rushed to stabilize him, their eyes glistening with a mix of exhaustion and relief. "He's still with us," the surgeon announced, his voice heavy but triumphant. The words rippled through the gathered staff like sunlight breaking through a storm. In the pediatric wing, the newborn lay cradled in a heated incubator, fragile but alive. The baby's soft breaths filled the room, a miracle that had been carried into their hands by a bleeding, desperate dog. Nurses leaned close to the glass, tears sliding silently down their cheeks. One whispered, "They both made it, the baby and the puppy." Her words caught in her throat, choked with emotion. For the first time since the ordeal began, hope spread through the hospital like a quiet flame. Back in the lobby, Mark stood still, his hand resting on the evidence tray. Around him, the staff whispered in awe, replaying the moment when the puppy had dragged that mysterious bag into their lives. Their fear had turned into sorrow, then admiration, and now overwhelming gratitude. The nurse who had first touched the dog wiped her tears and whispered softly, "He saved them both. He saved all of us." Her words echoed the thought that had been lingering in every heart. As the puppy was wheeled past, weak but alive, The crowd instinctively stepped aside. Some bowed their heads. Others pressed their palms together in silent thanks. Mark knelt, gently brushing his fingers over the dog's fur. "Rest now, hero," he murmured, his voice breaking. The puppy's tail flickered weakly, the smallest gesture of acknowledgement. And in that quiet moment, the hospital filled not with chaos or fear, but with tears. Tears of relief, gratitude, and the unshakable truth that they had just witnessed a miracle born from courage. Days later, the hospital lobby no longer echoed with panic and fear, but with hushed voices filled with reverence. Word of the incredible night had spread beyond the hospital walls, drawing reporters, police officials, and families eager to glimpse the little hero who had saved a life and exposed a buried truth. The once injured German Shepherd puppy now rested in a recovery room, his body bandaged but healing. Despite his weakened state, his eyes were brighter, carrying the same unshakable determination that had carried him through the hospital doors. Nurses brought him treats, children left flowers by his bedside, and strangers whispered blessings as they passed. He was no longer just a stray, he was a symbol of courage. Mark stood at the foot of the puppy's bed, his heart heavy with pride. "You changed everything, buddy," he murmured softly. The dog's ears flicked at the sound of his voice, and his tail wagged weakly. A silent thank you. Across the room, Dr. Lewis held the baby, now stronger and stable, swaddled in fresh blankets. Tears lined the doctor's eyes as he whispered, "This child lives because of him." The nurse added quietly, "And maybe, so do countless others. Those files will bring justice." The room fell silent at her words, the weight of the truth sinking in. This tiny creature had carried not only a life, but also hope for many who had been forgotten. Soon after, the hospital arranged a small gathering. Staff, patients, and visitors stood together as Mark stepped forward with the newborn in his arms, the puppy lying on a cushioned stretcher beside them. "This little one is alive today because of him," Mark said, his voice strong but trembling with emotion. "He may not wear a uniform or carry a badge, but he is more of a hero than any of us could ever hope to be." Applause broke out, echoing through the sterile halls. Some clapped, others wept openly, their hearts overflowing with gratitude. The puppy lifted his head, blinking at the sound, his ears twitching as though he understood. The baby stirred in the nurse's arms, letting out a soft cry that seemed to harmonize with the dog's faint whimper. The moment was pure, unshakable, unforgettable, and as the hospital honored its unlikely hero, one truth became clear. Sometimes the bravest souls aren't human at all. They come on four legs with fur and with a heart willing to sacrifice everything. And this puppy was one of them.